Hello everyone, welcome. This is Andrew from Immortal Playing Cards, and today's video I had a discussion with Michael Vincent. He's an amazing magician who focused very strongly on classic effects and things like that. It was a very inspiring conversation I had with him. I left feeling very inspired. He gives you some great tips on how to improve your magic, how to engage with your audience, and some things he doesn't like about magic at the moment and things like that. For one, he hates like online shows. He likes the audience interaction, that kind of thing. But everything is talked about in the discussion with him. It's a long video, but if you're interested in this, I really hope you enjoy it. Right, so today I am here with Michael Vincent. Do you want to say hello, Michael?
Hi there.
This is pretty surreal for me, I must say. I've followed Michael for years. This is a huge honor to have him on a Zoom call today. So I've prepared some questions for him. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get into it. So Michael, the first question is, well, it's for people who aren't aware. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Okay, my name's Michael. As everyone may know, I've been passionate about magic since I was 6 years old. So we're talking 1970. And just consider 1970 and that time frame, new decade. I'd just seen David Nixon on television, very famous British magician. But I also saw Doug Henning. I saw Fred Capps, Ricciardi, and Ricky Jay, all within that time frame. So that was really appealing to me. I must give credit to Doug Henning because as a boy, I thought he was wonderful. It looked like real magic to me. At that time, I wasn't researching secrets. That came after seeing the film The Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Have you seen that film? A wonderful film about... Yeah, okay. Yeah, con men, grifters, card sharks. And I was so captivated by what I saw, I went to the library. It was so simple. Miss, have you got any books on how to cheat at cards? And that was where I discovered magic books for free from my library. I didn't have to spend any money. I could practice magic using very simple props around the house. But I also started learning sleight of hand with playing cards specifically. And here's the amazing thing. Once I started reading magic books, I became aware of magic shops because most of the magic shops, the address were written in the back of some of the books. So I would go to the magic shops in the West End, Hamley's Toy Shop, Ken Brooks' Magic Place on Wardour Street. I would then end up at Davenport's, which was at the time opposite the British Museum. And then I would find my home, which was the Magic Spot. It was a magic shop owned by Alan Allen, the famous escapologist. He would become my mentor and introduce me to all the great magicians that were still alive and active and brilliant. So that's my backstory. I met all of my heroes except Fred Capps and Ed Marlowe, but I met everybody else. I'm a first generation student of Slidini. I spent time with Slidini, Tommy Wonder. My current mentor is Darwin Ortiz. When it comes to sleight of hand, Harry Lorraine was a big influence on me. So it's quite a privilege to meet all my heroes and study. I spent from 1980 right up to the present day performing. Now, because of the pandemic, no more shows. Yeah. This is the longest period I've been through where there's been no performances.
Wow. I mean, I also have a question about to do with the pandemic, actually.
Yeah.
Unlike yourself, who performs quite a lot and goes all over the world to
yeah.
and you seem to really love everything about performing to people. You love the interaction, the magic, the execution, everything to do with it. How has it affected you during this? Have you been practicing a lot more, or has it kind of knocked a bit of motivation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the performance of magic is the jewel in the crown. I still love the crown, and the crown for me is the subject. So in spite of the pandemic, I still get a lot of joy from my academic studies of magic. So I'm reading, I'm studying, and I'm creating new routines. I may never perform these routines, it doesn't matter. I'm still engaged in the subject. Obviously, I do want to perform and share it, but I have to accept the reality and the way the world is shifting. We are now becoming virtual creatures, as opposed to human beings having relationships with each other. I'm going to be honest with you, Andrew. I hate it. I do not like virtual shows. I've done a few already, and I hate them. I have no qualms saying this on camera. You put this on YouTube. I want magicians to hear me say this. I don't enjoy virtual shows with no audience and just an iPhone staring at me. Forget about it. That's not who I am. That's not the performer I was trained to be. And let me tell you, if this is the way the world is, I don't want to perform again. It's that simple. Okay. So in spite of the pandemic, I have to embrace the technology more now than ever so that I can teach my students. Because most of my students do not live in the United Kingdom, they live in other countries. So the internet allows me access to them, and it allows them access to me. So while the pandemic has killed off my performing, it hasn't killed off my passion for the subject. And I will say this on record, I didn't study magic to be a professional magician. I studied magic because I love the subject. It's the most interesting subject I have ever studied. And this goes way above algebra, geography, history, and all other things we were taught at school. Because if you think about it, as a subject, magic is very wide and very deep. On one level, you've got the magic tricks. You've got the nuts and bolts, the techniques, and how the tricks work. Next level, you've got the script writing, coming up with a presentation. Next level, you've got to overcome the psychological fear of performing in front of people. That doesn't mean you did the trick well. Once you've overcome the fear of performing sleight of hand in front of an audience, what next? Well, you've got to make the audience care about it. How do you do that? Well, you've got to understand the psychology of people, the psychology of humans. You've got to understand what people are interested in. You've got to become a psychologist of people. And then what? You have to become an expert communicator. You've got to become all things to many different people. All right? Can you see now how deep the subject is?
Wow. And
it's incredible.
Yeah, it's great because in my experience of performing, I mainly do kind of close up, circling at weddings, that kind of thing. And every single one you do is different. There's different people and a different experience. You always learn something. And it is fantastic because you have to adapt how you speak, how you present the trick. And that's something I love about it, the kind of mystery. So I think that's a really important part for me. I love imagination. Imagination's a huge thing. I'm actually making use of the time during the pandemic. And I also actually had an accident at the beginning of the year, so I'm still recovering from that. and I'm working on a coin matrix routine. And there's a few different twists to it because it's amazing, but I wanted to add that little extra kicker that people aren't expecting and implement the use of imagination and explaining if you use your imagination, you can create all sorts of miracles.
So just listening to you talk, I can hear how important engaging with people is to you.
Yes.
And you can perform your routine for 100 different audiences. Now, it might be the same trick, but it's not the same experience. Okay, so studying magic has created other pathways in my mind for other areas of interest. And while they may not be necessarily related to magic, they are related to people. And I'm so grateful to my mentor, Alan Allen, because he made me appreciate one thing, one simple distinction at a very young age. He said, Michael, never forget this. We are in a communication business. Magic is just one means for communication. You can be a singer, a dancer, an actor, a storyteller, a writer. We would spend more time watching newsreaders than magicians. And he would say to me, which one of these is your favorite newsreader? I said, well, I like Trevor McDonald. He's very clear and precise. I like David Attenborough. He's got a very soft way of speaking about a very complex subject. And he makes this complex subject so beautiful and fascinating. I became interested in the natural world. Think about that. Why? Because he's so charismatic. Just the sound of his voice, but his vocal delivery, very gentle, but very precise. And he says, right, how can we use that as magicians? Well, this is a typical dialogue we would have. He said, well, I can see how being conversational, friendly, warm, engaging, and allowing the spectator room to breathe in the performance brings the whole experience alive. Because it's not just about me and my tricks. It's about what they're thinking and how they are feeling every step of the way throughout the performance. I'm 15 years old having this level of conversation. Do you get that? Yeah, so the 1970s was the most wonderful period because we had old timers who were still alive, sharing their knowledge and wisdom. Listen to this. Do you remember the film Zulu with Michael Caine?
Yes.
The director of that film was one of my friends. His name was Cy Enfield.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
So imagine I'm with a Hollywood director talking card magic, but he's also sharing with me the secret of how to direct actors. He was directing me in that conversation.
Wow. It sounds like to me there's people that have inspired you so much to kind of cling on to learn a little bit of everything in a way from every different field. Though it may not be magic or anything like that, you can always learn something from it. And that sounds extremely important. You know, having mentors, I think, is such an important thing. It's not, a lot of people don't have mentors. Me personally, I follow certain people constantly on their website, their YouTube, all these different things. If they've got a lecture, go to that. And I think it's important, you also being one of my mentors, I'm trying very hard not to jump around all excited right now. So it is an honor. But it sounds like to me, you've met some amazing people and some magicians as well, who have changed everything.
They were the most amazing human beings I've ever had the privilege to meet. And the fact that they were magicians, well, that was the context. But now that I can talk about these people, I can get fully associated with how amazing they were as human beings, because they were kind, they were generous towards me. I mean, come on, let's use let's look at the obvious. I come from the Black community. Most of them, they did a double take because they had not encountered a young teenager from the Black community who could do card tricks and do card tricks really well. Alan told me this story. When I met Cy Enfield for the first time, it was at Valerie's Patisserie in Old Compton Street. I went to the bathroom and Alan told me afterwards, Cy said to me, Alan, this kid, is he any good? He said, well, ask him. He'll show you a trick. He said, are you sure? He said, I don't want to embarrass the kid. He said, Michael won't be embarrassed. He will perform at the drop of a hat. Just ask him. He might be shy, but he's not shy when it comes to cards, which was true. So he asked me to show him a trick. And I did one of his tricks from his books. I said, Mr. Enfield, I really like your aces for connoisseurs. He says, can you do it? I said, yes, sir. Show me. So I did. And his face lit up like a Christmas tree. So you can imagine when I meet young magicians today and they say to me, Michael, I really love your DVDs. My next question is, what tricks do you like? Oh, I like the rising aces. Can you show me? Yes. And they show me my tricks. So the chain of excellence continues. It's such a beautiful thing.
I mean,
and I want my students to be better than me. That's it.
Well, that to me would sound like such a proud achievement, you inspiring someone to do that. Well, not to do it, but kind of to take it to the next level kind of thing, you know, how they present things, how not adding unnecessary things into tricks and things like that. So yeah, it actually leads to my next question. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the Vincent Academy?
Absolutely. Let me just plug myself in. Okay. I was running out of power. I'll give you the backstory to the Vincent Academy.
Oh, okay.
About 7 years ago, I was on a personal development program called the Landmark Forum. And I was doing a weekly evening session, and we got to create a project. And this project came to mind, to create an environment where I could teach students globally and support them with their magic. Because at that time I was just embracing the internet, and it just occurred to me, I can reach more magicians in one video than a year of writing letters to different people. And then I had the Academy built, the website. I set up the infrastructure with some web designers, and magicians can go online and they can schedule Skype sessions with me. And my goal is to leave the craft of magic better than I found it. How do I do that? Through my books, my DVDs, my lectures, my seminars, my workshops, and my online coaching of students. Ultimately, my students will become my greatest advert, because they will proudly say Michael Vincent taught them. So that's the Academy. Yeah. And fortunately, during this pandemic, it's the one thing that's helping me to survive.
Yeah, keeps the spark,
yeah,
so to speak. I remember researching you ages ago, and I remember seeing you on Penn and Teller, and that was my first kind of look at proper classical magic. That first introduced me to it, and I just could not stop researching all these classic moves. And I find it so important when doing tricks to people, people seem to think the harder the trick, the better it is. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's, if you use a simple effect and you perform it really well, I think, you know, you've done your job as a magician. But you know, you can adapt it, you can do this, but you should never take away the basics or the classical sort of effects. The classical effects are actually some of the hardest moves I've ever tried to learn.
What moves would you say, for example, have been difficult for you?
I've always struggled with the pass. I know a lot of people do that religiously, but I don't take it as a people seeing me. I take it as a misdirection kind of move. So not the actual move, but me being all tensed up like that, executing the move. And I just thought, it's meant to be a misdirection thing. I'm misdirecting them. So why am I so tense? So I just kind of do a pass saying, oh, you know, a lot of magicians use their sleeves and I've already done it, you know, and it's a misdirection thing. And the thing, I struggled a lot with the pass over the years, but in these past few years, I've kind of realized tricks need to be incorporated with other things, and you need to focus on what to incorporate it with, not just the actual sleight itself. So that was one I used to struggle with, and I used to work really hard on it, but I've
well, let's stay on that particular point regarding the classic pass, okay? Because like you, I was intimidated by the move because it did for me what it did for you. It forced my body into this weird shape, and it communicated tension and nervous energy. It killed my body language. I didn't realize that's what it was at the time. It's only probably in the last 10 years, I began to look at my whole body language and I realized certain moves aren't right for me. The classic pass is not right for me, but I found a way to make it work so that it doesn't communicate stress or tension in my body. So much so you wouldn't even know that I've done it.
Wow.
Now, you said something very interesting. You said, just because a trick has a lot of moves in it doesn't mean it's a good trick. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, to anyone watching this, I want to reframe their thinking and attitude. It's not about the moves, it's about the effect and the impact it has on people. How the effect is achieved is the least of your problems. However, you've got to be a student to realize if you're going to learn a classic trick, you've got to study all the variations on that classic trick so that your brain is armed with as much information as possible. And then you can start creating and designing a routine that matches your natural expression. I did this with the cups and balls, the linking rings, triumph, the 4 aces, the 4 different pockets, all the classics. I treated each one as a concept, and I went down the rabbit's hole, and I studied multiple versions. I wanted to understand how different magicians thought about the travelers, for example. And then I created my own routine. I just closed my eyes and I imagined if I was in the audience watching myself do this, what would I want to see? Well, simple. The aces are signed. They're put back in the deck. The deck goes in the box, and I can stand in front of my audience and my hands are empty, and I can remove all 4 aces from 4 different pockets. Why can I do that? Because the aces are already there. It took me 25 years to solve it.
Wow.
But that is what the audience sees. They see me remove the aces from 4 different pockets. Remove, not put in and take out, because my hands are empty. That was the goal. Anything less, and it's not worth it. It's just not worth doing. It becomes an exercise in the ego. No, I want it to be a magical, suspenseful experience for the audience. It's a thing of beauty. Do you get that?
I love when performing these sort of effects. I love it when people do that and show that their hand's empty. My first kind of experience with that was when you were on Penn and Teller and you did a particular move and you showed your empty palm, I freaked out. This was very early in my Magic and I was absolutely baffled. I remember watching it, and even still to this day, some effects baffle me because as a magician, you try to follow what's going on. Okay. So I've seen a kind of lecture you were doing in Asia sort of area. I can't remember where, but you were doing this effect at a table. I think it was after a lecture, and these magicians were watching you, and you did this classic effect, and they all screamed, not because they didn't know how it was done, but because they know the sleight of hand that goes into it.
The problem for us magicians, once we start learning magic, we don't experience it the way we once did, with no knowledge. But we've got a database of knowledge. And if we see certain actions that certain actions that remind us of a pass or a cull or a certain technique, we dismiss the trick. That's the curse. I've not been fooled by a magic trick in a long time. So when I read a trick in a book, I very often wish I could have seen it performed before I knew how it was done. I want to try and remind magicians, when you watch another magician, put your ego to sleep and try and remember how it felt watching a magic trick for the first time. Because if we don't have that sense of wonder, we can't give it away to the audience. It becomes too cynical. I'm going to fool you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Sorry. This actually brings me on to my next question. It came to my attention, I follow a couple of people who do street magic, and I noticed they practically force themselves onto the spectators. They don't give them an option to, if they would want to see it, they just get straight into it. They practically say, I'm going to show you a card trick, and do it. And they, there might be some personal issues. They may just not like magic. I've met people who just don't want to see it. What are your views on approaching people? I personally do a polite, respectful manner because that is how I would like to be approached.
The first thing I will say, and this is very important, I think it's critical that all magicians treat our audience members with the utmost dignity and respect. If they're not interested in seeing magic, you must never force it down their throat. Secondly, if they do want to see magic, just consider you may be the first magician they've ever seen. So their measure of magic and magicians will be you. And if you do a good job, they will be excited to see other magicians. Why? Because you gave them a positive experience. But if you meet people who give you resistance, oh, magician's not another one, well, guess what? They likely had a bad experience with a magician, someone they'd seen. I've heard lay people say, you magicians are so arrogant and up yourselves. I couldn't argue with him because we are. I said, sir, you're quite right. But I said, just consider the magician you saw wasn't me. He said, you make a good point, sir. And he said, go on then, show me a trick. And I did. And he smiled. Took my business card. This was years ago. But we both got something of value in that exchange.
Yeah.
So I met a magician once by the name of Gene Anderson. And he dropped a bombshell on me. Wonderful man. It's an American magician. Michael, I want to tell you something. Don't ever forget this, please. Always treat your audience member with the utmost dignity and respect. Because if you do, the audience will love the way you treated that one person. And if you ask anybody else to come up on stage, they will be all forming a queue. but you must treat them with dignity and respect. He said, it breaks my heart to see magicians treat the audience members like a piece of meat. No, they pay your bills, and it's your job to reward them with a great show. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And I could tell his show would be spectacular. Why? Because he had this playful, joyful energy about him. Okay.
I remember watching, and one of my favorite magicians of all time is Ricky Jay.
Right.
I just love how he is. He's always suited up and things like that. He's so well spoken, and he's got a little bit of cheekiness to him, but not over the top. And I like to try and incorporate that myself a little bit, be cheeky, but not over the top. And he's so well mannered with people. And I think that makes a huge difference, because you're very well spoken towards your audience. You treat them with a lot of manners and things like that. Do you think it makes a difference?
You were breaking up slightly. What makes a difference?
Talking to people with like manners, being very well spoken with it.
Well, I think the communication with the audience is very important, because apart from our appearance, the words that we speak is another tool that we use to engage and influence people with. And if we speak in a nice way, in a conversational tone, with a very gentle energy, not aggressive, people may find that endearing. And believe it or not, all before you've done your first trick.
Yeah.
Make sense?
I heard you, people make an assumption about you within a few seconds, if I remember correctly. So I suppose that's human nature at the same time. So you've got to kind of knock these, I say, barriers. You've got to knock some barriers down, defensive barriers. You know, that can be from experiences, you know, it could be from anything.
Well, you know what's beautiful about magic, Andrew? If you do a magic trick really well and you get a good reaction, the way people respond, all their barriers drop away. The ego fades away. And all that's left is the real essence of the human being. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could meet people at their real essence whenever we meet someone new? The only way we can do that, we have to present ourselves as authentically as possible before we do the magic. We've got to be open and vulnerable, not afraid, but vulnerable as a human being. And my friend Cellini, bless him, he said to me, Mike, the more childlike you become, the more successful you will be. We can't expect our audience to lower their barrier if we come on with a massive ego, because they will see it and feel it.
And I personally can see when someone's just genuine. And I think that also makes a difference when someone's just a genuinely nice person, not being so scripted and things like that. You can kind of take something from them and, you know, take a real liking to them. So I think that's really important, like being professional, but also being quite approachable and things like that. And I think those are some qualities that are really, really important. So, sorry, I'm reading my questions off a bit of paper. I thought I'm going to these off because I'm probably going to be a little bit flustered. So from your experience, as you've been doing magic for, is it 5 decades now?
Well, close. Once I get to 60, then it will be 50 years. Yeah. Wow. 4 years from now. Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to someone who is looking to take their magic to the next level? So doing the odd gig at a wedding or doing it full time, because you've seen magic develop. You know, there's a classical thing, which was books were the way to go. And now you've got things like DVDs and downloads and things like that. And also more tricks are coming out now, whereas back then it was a lot about the classics. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I will say most magicians don't read. They take the path of least resistance and go straight to a DVD or the internet, especially the new generation. Magic has become so accessible. The first thing I would say, if you want to take your magic seriously, start reading. And try and read books before the 1940s. If you can go back further, even better, say from the 1800s. And when you look at the magic from those books, you'll realize the great masters created with very little resources. And it's the most purest, the most beautiful expression of magic I've ever encountered. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would say to magicians, ask yourself this question. How serious are you about the subject? Do you like the subject? Are you fascinated with the secrets? Or do you really love the subject of magic? If you do love it, what is it specifically that you love about it? You heard me earlier talk about the different areas in my mind that got opened up out of studying magic. This is where I'm going. Because if you approach the subject right, you'll discover areas of interest you may not have discovered any other way. Secondly, forget about the profession for a moment. To be professional is a different conversation. What I'm interested in is inspiring students to become craftsmen first. Become a craftsman, learn the subject, master the classics, understand why the classics work. And now let's look at the performance. What kind of performer are you? Are you funny? Are you mysterious? Are you a raconteur, a storyteller? Let's look at your style. Now let's find tricks that will support that style of delivery. Now, let's get out and perform and start to analyze how the audience responds to you. Let's go back to the drawing board. All of this before you turn professional. Most magicians turn professional and they have no idea what they're doing. They're just going out, doing shows, earning money. That's fine, nothing wrong.
I think
I'm looking at it from an academic point of view, okay?
I think also a word to kind of sum that up is passion. There's a difference to people that go and perform for money, and there's people that have got a genuine passion for it. For me, magic, I used to be extremely shy, and this helped me, and I became a waiter at a restaurant that I worked at for a very long time. And they both kind of bounced off each other. So I learned some things from performing. I learned some things from just talking to people in restaurant and things like that. And it's an amazing thing. And when you get that confidence, you get this spark just to progress and progress. And it's just a lovely feeling when you go and do these gigs and you perform and you create an impression, you create a moment. And that's just a really special thing to me. But if you don't have passion...
Here's something for you, Andrew. I've got something for you, okay? Do you have a copy of a book called The Structural Conception of Magic by Ascanio?
No. Not that. I don't think so.
Okay. Do whatever you can to try and track it down.
Okay.
The Structural Conception of Magic. It's all theory, but it's really dynamic theory. It's not theory for the sake of it. It's actually quite beautiful and profoundly spiritual. Just listening to you talk, you mentioned this whole thing about creating that moment for people. Ascanio calls it the atmosphere, the construction of the magical atmosphere. I just call it the atmosphere of magic. It's that space where, for a moment, magic felt real, and you're not quite sure what to do with yourself afterward.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's very
that's where I live. Yeah.
It's amazing talking to someone who's, you know, been doing this for a very long time. You know, I feel all inspired now. And yeah, it's just amazing when you know, someone specifically hires you for a gig and things like that. And I personally feel so flattered that they wanted me to do it. They specifically come to me and say, I want you to do this party or this wedding or something like this. And I take it as a real compliment. So it drives me to really want to make it go as best as I can. So the best effects, and create such a special time. And at the end, I always go to the main person and ask for feedback. I've had some negative feedback. I've had positive feedback. But you learn from that. And I think getting feedback from the person who hired you is very important.
Well, you said something critical there. There's a world of difference between hiring the magician and hiring Andrew or Michael Vincent. If they hire you, the person, your magic comes along for the ride.
Yeah.
Think about that.
I mean, I perform in the restaurant that I work at, and no one expects it. So I tend to be known as a cheeky character, right? So I use that to my advantage, and I subtly let in that I'm a magician. I never impose, and they leave with an experience that they weren't expecting at all. In a restaurant, magician, and it's a country restaurant, you know, it's a sort of place where you wouldn't expect it. If you were a very in the center of London at a Michelin star restaurant and they had entertainment, possibly, but in a quiet area.
It's a wonderful privilege to be responsible for bringing that to people. And which is why I take the subject very seriously.
Well, I think we pretty much summed up all the questions, and I honestly, it's been such a privilege to have this conversation with you, and I hope some people at home have seen this and, you know, learned something from it, because from talking to you, I see how passionate you are about the art and certain things about the art. And you were saying there were things that you think are great qualities, some things you don't like. But, you know, I hope people who are watching this will leave with something.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. It's been
I really appreciated this conversation. And if you need anything else, just let me know, okay?
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.